أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن عليًا ولي الله. أشهد أن عليًا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. حي على خير العمل. حي على خير العمل. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما.
صلوات محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We thank everybody for being here this evening as we continue our Muharram al-Jalas series over the next several weeks. This weekend we'll be commemorating the Shahada of our fourth holy Imam, Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And for the lectures that will take place in the majlis, that will take place tonight and tomorrow, we are very blessed to have Shaykh Salim Yusufali that's visiting us, who is visiting us from California, and we're very thankful to him for being here with us over the next 2 nights, inshallah. We're going to get started with our majlis program now, and I'd like to please request Brother Muhammad Sajjad to come forward for the recitation of the Holy Quran. Salawat Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ارجعوا إلى أبيكم فقولوا يا أبانا إن ابنك سرق وما شهدنا إلا بما علمنا وما كنا للغيب حافظين. واسأل القرية التي كنا فيها والعير التي أقبلنا فيها وإنا لصادقون. قال بل سولت لكم أنفسكم أمرا فصبر جميل عسى الله أن يأتيني بهم جميعا فصبر جميل عسى الله أن يأتيني بهم جميعا إنه هو العليم الحكيم وتولى عنهم وقال يا أسف على يوسف وابيضت عيناه من الحزن فهو كظيم قالوا تالله تفتأ تذكر يوسف حتى تكون حضرا أو تكون من الهالكين قال إنما أشكو بثي وحزني إلى الله وأعلم من الله ما لا تعلمون يا فتحسسوا من يوسف وأخيه ولا تأيسوا من روح الله إنه لا ييأس من روح الله إلا القوم الكافرون يا بني اذهبوا فتحسسوا من يوسف وأخيه ولا تيأسوا من روح الله إنه لا ييأس من روح الله إلا القوم الكافرون صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على رسول الله وآله الأطهار على رسول الله وآله الأطهار صلوات على محمد وآل محمد بار دیگر صلوات. اپنی آنکھوں سے ہی دیکھ لینا مفتیوں تم ذرا چلتے چلتے. اپنی آنکھوں سے ہی دیکھ لینا مفتیوں تم ذرا چلتے چلتے. اپنی آنکھوں سے ہی دیکھ لینا مفتیوں تم ذرا چلتے چلتے. روند ڈالیں گے فتوے تمہارے یہ جلوس ازا چلتے چلتے. روند ڈالیں گے فتوے تمہارے یہ جلوس ازا چلتے چلتے. کچھ قدم ہوئے بڑھا شہ کی جانب کچھ قدم شہ بڑے ہر کی جانب. کچھ قدم ہوئے بڑھا شہ کی جانب کچھ قدم شہ بڑے ہر کی جانب. بخش دی چند لمحوں میں شہ نے ہر کی ساری خطا چلتے چلتے. بخش دی چند لمحوں میں شہ نے ہر کی ساری خطا چلتے چلتے. طاق و زنجیر یہ کہہ رہے تھے اے یزید اب ہے تیری تباہی. طاق و زنجیر یہ کہہ رہے تھے اے یزید اب ہے تیری تباہی. جس کو بیمار سمجھا تھا تم نے شام تک آ گیا چلتے چلتے. جس کو بیمار سمجھا تھا تم نے شام تک آ گیا چلتے چلتے. لگ رہا ہے کہ میری لحد میں کوئی سورج طلوع ہو رہا ہے. لگ رہا ہے کہ میری لحد میں کوئی سورج طلوع ہو رہا ہے. دوستوں نے رکھی تھی کفن میں تھوڑی خاک شفا چلتے چلتے. دوستوں نے رکھی تھی کفن میں تھوڑی خاک شفا چلتے چلتے. مشک پرچم میں بتلا رہی ہے شام سے یہ صدا رہی ہے. مشک پرچم میں بتلا رہی ہے شام سے یہ صدا رہی ہے. پیاس سے میرا رشتہ نہ ٹوٹا تھک گیا القمہ چلتے چلتے. प्यास से मेरा रिश्ता न टूटा थक गया कमा चलते चलते अपनी आँखों से ही देख लेना मुफ्तियों तुम ज़रा चलते चलते अपनी आँखों से ही देख लेना मुफ्तियों तुम ज़रा चलते चलते और मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सलावत
Jazakallah, thank you so much, Brother Muhammad Sajjad, for your Quran recitation as well as your Salam recitation. Next, I'd like to please call upon Brother Ali Abbas Hasnain for recitation of Salam. Salawat Muhammad and Wali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل. O Sajjad, guardian of tears, O Sajjad, whisperer of prayers, O Sajjad, guardian of tears, O Sajjad, whisperer of prayers. Zainab wakes up her nephew. Son, now it's time for you to lead this caravan throughout this barren land. Sajjad, while you slept, women and children wept. One by one we would fall, no one to hear our call. O Sajjad, guardian of tears, O Sajjad, whisperer of prayers. I stayed with my brother every step of the way. No doubt we have our trials, but if you'd have seen that day, children were full of fright when daytime turned to night. Angels came to receive Hussein, who lay between earth and sky. O Sajjad, guardian of tears, O Sajjad, whisperer of prayers. Now our Karbala begins, and gawking crowds await me here without a covering, and you'll be tied up in chains. And when we lose Sakina, holding her father's hand, telling him of her trials and waiting for her own death. Oh, Sajjad, guardian of tears. Oh, Sajjad, whisperer of prayers. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Jazakallah, thank you so much, Brother Ali Abbas, for your recitation. Just a quick reminder that for the children who are going to be in the hall, we just request that the parents have the children sit with them so that the noise level is reduced and that everyone is able to hear the lecture. Salawat Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And now we're going to have the lecture. And just before I ask Shaykh Salim to come forward to the member, I just wanted to provide a short introduction for him, though I'm sure many of us already know very much about him. Shaykh Salim Yusufali was born and raised in the United States. After completing his BS and MS in computer science from Stanford University in California, he worked in Silicon Valley as a software engineer and then as an engineering manager. In 2004, he left his job and moved to Qom to study in the Hawza and completed his MA degree in 2014. From 2014 to 2019, he was a spiritual guide to a full-time Islamic school in Ontario, Canada. As of 2020, he is the Dean of Mission at Rise Academy, a full-time Islamic school, and the Assistant Resident Scholar of Saba Center in San Jose, California. He also earned his doctorate degree in educational leadership from Western University. And once again, we're very honored to have Shaykh Salim with us for the next 2 nights, and I'd like to please request Shaykh Salim to come forward, and we'll begin the lecture this evening. Salawat Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma ala
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وخاتم النبيين وسيد المرسلين أبي القاسم محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعن الله الدائم على أعدائهم أجمعين من ليلتنا هذه إلى قيام يوم الدين. Respected elders, brothers, sisters, may Allah reward you for your good intentions in participating in this majlis of Aza and of mourning and commemoration for the martyrdom of Imam Ali ibn Hussein Zain al-Abidin as-Sajjad alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. On this evening of his martyrdom, we express our condolences to our living Imam, the Imam of our time, on the occasion of the martyrdom of his great-grandfather. It is my honor to be able to participate in this gathering with all of you as we jointly commemorate this event. Tonight I wanted to mention a few things about Imam Sajjad alayhi salam and focus on one aspect of his personality, which is that of him being a lifelong mourner. And the reason why I'm focusing on that is because as we are gathering here, it's now some days after Ashura, the month of Muharram. We're still in the month of Muharram, but the 10 days of the month of Muharram have passed. And we're into the mourning season for the followers of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. And as we wear our black clothes, as we participate in these gatherings, it's important for us to be able to have a deeper understanding of why is it that we're here and what we're trying to achieve through this process of mourning and grieving. So let me now start with a little bit about our Imam alayhi salam, whose occasion of martyrdom we're commemorating tonight. The same way that our Imam was madhloom, the same way that he was subject to so much oppression during his lifetime, I would say that oftentimes Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, in terms of what he stood for and what he symbolizes, even that is sometimes subject to injustice. Meaning the same way he was madhloom during his lifetime, his memory and his legacy is also sometimes subject to injustice, meaning that he is not given the right position and the right due and the right understanding that he should be given. Oftentimes we think about Imam Sajjad alayhi salam and we say that who was Imam? He was, for example, Bimar Karbala. Now Imam Sajjad alayhi salam was Bimar in Karbala. He was ill in Karbala. He was so ill that he was unable to fight. And sometimes when we feel sick, or let's say one of our loved ones or community members feel sick, then we seek tawassul by Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. No problem in that, that's a good thing. But should we say that the identity of a person lies in their being sick for some period of time? Because after all, that's a state that comes and it goes. And the same way with the Imam alayhi salam, he was sick for some time, but then he also was healthy for some time. So to summarize Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, to say that he was the one who was the sick person, is not doing justice to who Imam Sajjad alayhi salam actually was. And when we think about Imam Sajjad alayhi salam and his legacy, it is something which is very profound. You know, we oftentimes identify ourselves with the message and the mission of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. We take out time from our schedule, we come to these type of gatherings, we wear black, we beat our chests. And we remember Imam Hussein alayhi salam in so many different ways. Every time we pray, we remember Imam Hussein alayhi salam because the turbas that we use are from the sand of Karbala. When we drink water, we've been taught that the simple act, we're supposed to remember Imam Hussein alayhi salam. So inshallah, on a daily basis, we remember Imam Hussein. Many of us are in the habit of doing ziyarah of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, for example, after each one of our prayers. So even there, we're told to remember Imam Hussein alayhi salam. But it is my understanding that the legacy of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam similarly is meant to have a daily impact on us, the same way that the legacy of Imam Hussein alayhi salam is supposed to have on us. And what I mean here is the du'as of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. What I mean here is the lifestyle of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. And what I mean here is the approach that Imam Sajjad alayhi salam took towards his mourning and his commemoration. Now, I'm going to focus on this latter point right here. Imam Sajjad, during his lifetime, was subject to a number of injustices. All of you are familiar with the events leading up to and what took place in Karbala. And Imam Sajjad alayhi salam had to live through that. But the struggle and the difficulties that Imam Sajjad alayhi salam was facing did not end on the day of Ashura. They continued from the day of Ashura onwards. And you might say that, well, how could it get worse after somebody had to face so much? In reality, the struggles that Imam Sajjad alayhi salam had to face after that, along with the other prisoners and the other members of the caravan, were of a very severe, very difficult nature. That continues during captivity. When he comes back to Medina, we know that in history, Imam Sajjad alayhi salam's difficulties continued. Just as an example, we have a hadith which is narrated from our sixth Imam alayhi salam, where he says that after the shahada of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, everyone turned away from the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam except for 3 people. And then he names those 3 people. So imagine in the entire ummah of the Prophet, 60 years after the death of the Prophet, there's only 3 people who have that correct understanding and that loyalty to the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. 3 people. Now this is something which is shocking. Imagine that Imam Sajjad alayhi salam is dealing with this type of community around him, or lack of community around him. It continues. In another hadith, we're told that Imam Sajjad alayhi salam himself, he says that in Mecca and Medina, which are meant to be like the stronghold of the Muslims, right? These are the cities where you have the birthplace of Islam. He says in Mecca and Medina, there are only 20 people who are muhib of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. There's only 20 people who actually have love of the Ahlul Bayt. So imagine you have 3 people who are real Shias at the time. You have 20 people in Makkah and Medina who have love of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. And the difficulties continue. Soon after the Shahada of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, you have the rise of Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, la'anatullahi alayhi, the Umayyad Khalifa. And then you have the rise of his governor, Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, la'anatullahi alayhi. Al-Hajjaj was a tyrant. He was a despot. He was, in history, they say that he killed 50,000 people. And that's the people that he killed, like he ordered to be executed through different means, let alone those that he fought against in wars. Al-Hajjaj was so cruel. They said he had like a prison of his own, which even the name of that prison would strike fear into the hearts of the people. And they say that in that prison, there was a certain section where he purposely had said that leave no roof on that part of the prison. It's an open air prison. And you can imagine baking under the open sun in the heat, and these people had nothing to cover themselves with. The prisoners had nothing to cover themselves while they're baking in this open air prison. And so many other acts of cruelty. All this is happening during the life of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. So he's facing difficulty after difficulty. And we're told that one of the titles of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam is that he was known as Bukka. Bukka is someone who is not only baki, baki means that somebody who weeps, but Bukka is somebody who weeps excessively, frequently, to the point where they become associated with that title of weeping. And we're told that in one hadith of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he says that in history there was 5 people who were known as the Bukka. One of them was Nabi Adam alayhi salam. One of them was Yaqub alayhi salam. One of them was Yusuf alayhi salam. One of them was Fatima bint Muhammadin sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And the 5th one was Imam Ali ibn Hussein. So imagine that in all of history, in the words of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, Imam Sajjad alayhi salam is one of those people, the top 5 in terms of how he was weeping. So Imam Sajjad alayhi salam led a life where he faced a lot of difficulties. He was a weeper. And sometimes, brothers and sisters, we can look at that and understand it at a shallow level. And we say that, okay, he was weeping because he was sad, and he led his life in a state of mourning. But if we go deeper, we can ask ourselves this question, that what was the purpose of all the mourning of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam? All of you, I'm sure, would say that, well, we know that Imam Sajjad had a duty to convey the tragedies to the people. So one of the ways he did that is through the tear, right? When people would see him crying, then they would say, why is he crying? They would find out about what happened in Karbala, and then the word would spread. That was definitely one of the purposes behind the mourning of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. But tonight, I want to look at it a little bit deeper. And I want to dive into this concept of what does it mean to be truly mourning for the tragedies that befall the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. And then I want to go back to Imam Sajjad and see if we can understand something deeper about his life. If you can please help me with the salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So what I'm going to do is I'll take two ayahs of the Quran that come from two different stories. And each one of these ayat talk about grieving. Because we want to understand this from a Quranic perspective. What does it mean to be in a state of grief from the perspective of the Quran? So the first ayah, it is from Surah At-Tawbah, and it has to do with the incident of the Hijrah. Our Prophet was forced to leave his home. He had to migrate. It was a very difficult and precarious situation. And now he is going towards Medina. Now you know that along the way there was somebody who decided to accompany him. And in history, there's some different reports about why and for what purpose. That's not our concern right now. What we want to do is we want to go to the ayah of the Quran where Allah is describing the incident of the two people who are in the cave. One of them is our Prophet and the enemies are surrounding them. It's a very difficult situation. So here, Allah Ta'ala says that إِلَّا تَنْصُرُوهُ فَقَدْ نَصَرَهُ اللَّهُ. This is in the context of the Battle of Tabuk towards the end of the Prophet's life. And Allah is speaking to the people around the Prophet. He's saying that if you don't want to come to the aid of the Prophet, if you're scared, if you feel that you're going to not be victorious, then I'm going to give you an example from past. One example that should be clear in your minds. So Allah is going back to an incident that took place years back. إِذْ أَخْرَجَهُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. When the Prophet was forced to leave his home by the disbelievers. And then what happens? That إِذْ هُمَا فِي الْغَارِ. When they are in the cave, إِذْ يَقُولُ لِصَاحِبِهِ. When he told his companion, لَا تَحْزَنْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَنَا. He told his companion, meaning our Prophet told the one who was accompanying him in the cave, do not grieve. Indeed, Allah is with us. Now, if somebody looks at this ayah, and they only look at this ayah, and they ask the question that, what does the Quran say about grieving? Is it good for us to be in a state of grieving? Should we be sad about something that has taken place? The answer would be no. Because the Prophet is commanding this person in the cave, he's saying, La tahzan. Do not grieve. Inna Allaha ma'ana. Allah is with us. But we all know that when it comes to understanding the words of a wise speaker, it's not enough to only read one verse or one page. Right? Let's say, for example, a wise person sends you a letter, and the letter is 20 pages long, and then you just pick a page in the middle and you read that, and you say, okay, I understand what he's trying to tell me. That's not fair. Right? You have to look at all the words of that wise person. So we know that there are other places in the Quran where Allah talks about mourning and grieving. But definitely in this ayah of the Quran, Allah is saying that this type of grief is condemned. What type of grief is this? It's a type of grief of somebody who is worried about himself and worried about what has happened to his possessions that he's left behind, what's happened to, like, who's going to take care of things behind him. He's worried about what the future lies. He's worried about whether the promise of Allah will be fulfilled. In that case, the Prophet is telling him that, look, don't be sad over what might happen to you. Don't be sad over, the separation that you're going to have from your hometown. Right? It's okay. Right? We're doing this. It's God's instruction. We're going to be okay. We're going to get through this. So don't be in a state of grieving. Now, what we can understand from this is what? That there's a type of grieving where Allah is absent from that type of grieving, which is condemned in the Quran. You're not supposed to have that type of grief. So keep this in mind. This is something in tafsir of Tasneem of Ayatul Jawadi, he says that the Prophet didn't just say this once to the person who was accompanying him. The way that the Arabic appears in the ayah of the Quran indicates that the Prophet was repeating this frequently as a way of consoling him and getting him to stop being in the state of sadness and grief. Inna Allaha ma'ana, inna Allaha ma'ana. So this was the way that the Prophet was teaching him how to get out of his state of grief. So that's one ayah of the Quran. Now, there are other ayahs which similarly look down upon grieving. All of you are familiar with the story of Nabi Musa when he was born. His mother, who has a lot of love for her baby, she cares for her baby so much, Allah tells her to take your baby and put him in the river and let the water take him away from you. But, لا تخافي ولا تحزني. Right? Don't be scared, and don't let your grief of separation overcome you. Once again, Allah is saying that in that case, you shouldn't be in a state of grieving. Now, it's raising questions for us that what kind of grief is this? Right? Why is it that Allah is telling her not to grieve? Right? Is it that He's telling her not to be a mother? All mothers would, even if it's not a matter of putting their baby down a river and not knowing what's going to happen. Let's say something even less than that. Right? They're just separated from their baby for whatever long time. Most mothers, or all mothers, naturally they'll feel that pang of separation. Right? It's something that Allah has placed in them. Clearly, this is referring to some other type of grief. So keep this in mind. Now we're going to go to the second story of the Quran. And this comes from the ayat that were beautifully recited at the beginning of our majlis this evening. These ayat are from the story of Nabi Yusuf alayhi salam and Nabi Yaqub alayhi salam. You all know that the separation of Nabi Yusuf from Nabi Yaqub, it really was difficult for Nabi Yaqub alayhi salam. Nabi Yaqub kept up the memory of Nabi Yusuf alayhi salam. He kept on weeping for him. He kept on crying for him. And this is a prophet of Allah. And Allah in the Quran uses the stories of the prophets to present to us examples of what we're supposed to be like. And in these ayahs of the Quran, even though Allah describes the grief of Nabi Yaqub as prolonged, as extensive, to the point where those around him were telling him that, look, this is too much, right? You're going to destroy yourself. In no way, in no place in these ayat does Allah condemn the act of Nabi Yaqub alayhi salam. So here, it's a type of grief which is being praised. So we need to learn from this. We need to understand that why is it that in this story of Nabi Yaqub and the separation of Nabi Yusuf, why is it that this type of grief is being praised? Whereas in those other stories, we see that that type of grief is being looked down upon. So let's go through these ayat. So what happens is that the brothers of Nabi Yusuf alayhi salam, right? There's all the events that take place. Eventually, both the eldest brother and the youngest brother, and along with Nabi Yusuf, they are now missing. And so when the rest of the brothers come back, they tell their father what happened. وَتَوَلَّى عَنْهُمْ. He turned away from them. وَقَالَ يَا أَسَفَ عَلَى Yusuf. He says that, alas for Joseph. I miss Yusuf. I'm mourning for the separation from Nabi Yusuf alayhi salam. This is a prophet of Allah speaking. And then it describes what kind of grief he has. وَابْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْحُزْنِ. His eyes had become white out of huzn, out of grief. And so he was crying and crying and crying until he loses his eyesight. Now, what did the people around him say? His family members. فَهُوَ كَظِيمٌ, he was restraining himself. قَالُوا تَاللَّهِ تَفْتَأُ تَذْكُرُ يُوسُفَ حَتَّى تَكُونَ حَرَضًا أَوْ تَكُونَ مِنَ الْهَالِكِينَ. You keep on remembering Yusuf, you keep on remembering him, you're going to wreck your health or you're going to die out of your grief for him. That's the extent to the grief that Nabi Yaqub alayhi salam has. What is his response? قَالَ إِنَّمَا أَشْكُو بَثِّي وَحُزْنِي إِلَى اللَّهِ وَأَعْلَمُ مِنَ اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. He says that I complain of my anguish and my grief only to Allah. I know from Allah what you do not know. And then he tells them that, "O my sons, Ya bunayya idhabu fatahassasu min Yusuf." Go ahead and seek out Nabi Yusuf and his brother, and do not despair of Allah's mercy. Indeed, no one despairs of Allah's mercy except for the faithless. Let's go and look at this in a little bit more detail. We know that Nabi Yusuf alayhi salam, in this case, we know that Nabi Yaqub was aware that Nabi Yusuf hadn't been killed. He knew that Nabi Yusuf was alive, but still he was in a state of mourning over the separation. What is it that he is grieving? Why is it that Nabi Yaqub is emotional? Why is it that he's crying? Well, one of the reasons is that he's emotional, right? He's a father, right? Not only is a father, he is somebody who has love of Allah, and Nabi Yusuf alayhi salam is a wali of Allah. He is somebody who reflects Allah's perfection, right? He's somebody with divinely inspired character. So he's missing him. That's something which is natural. That type of grief is not condemned in the Quran. Second is that when Nabi Yusuf isn't there, Nabi Yaqub knows that the people around are deprived of the guidance of Nabi Yusuf alayhi salam. So that's something which also is causing him to be sad, that if only Nabi Yusuf were here, he would be a source of light, he would be a source of guidance for the people. So that's something which would, he's missing that. He's sad over that state. The third thing is that Nabi Yusuf alayhi salam, Nabi Yaqub knew that Nabi Yusuf had this vision, this dream of eventually Nabi Yusuf being among the chosen ones. But that dream, it didn't say that it's going to be an easy path. Nabi Yaqub knew that the path to this vision being fulfilled would be a difficult one. So Nabi Yaqub was weeping over the tragedies that Nabi Yusuf alayhi salam had to face, over the difficulties he had to face. All of these are contained within the mourning and weeping of Nabi Yaqub alayhi salam. So let's go into a little bit more detail here. When we have the two different types of griefs, right? One of them is a grief which really doesn't have a divine purpose in it. How do we know that? Because the Prophet tells the one who's accompanying him, he tells him, "La tahzan inna Allah ma'ana." Meaning that do not grieve, indeed Allah is with us. If that companion had his grief sourcing from a divinely inspired connection, if it was something that was related to Allah, then the Prophet wouldn't have told them that Allah is with us, because he would already be grieving because of a divine intention. There's something about his grief which is lacking Allah in it. And that's why he's telling him, "Inna Allah ma'ana." If Allah was with you, you wouldn't be grieving the way you're grieving. You wouldn't be grieving over the things that you are grieving. You would have a different type of grief, not this type of grief. In the story of Nabi Yusuf alayhi salam, we see something very important. That Yaqub alayhi salam, even though he's so much in a state of grief that he turned blind, he tells his sons, "Do not despair of the Ruh of Allah." Now I want to go into a little bit of some of the words we have in Arabic here. There's a word which is gham. Gham means grief. That's how we translate it. But gham in Arabic actually comes from the word ghamam, which means a cloud. Why is it that the word gham is used? What's its connection with the cloud? Well, you know how when the clouds come and they cover the sun, then imagine before it was like sunny and it was bright, and now the clouds come along, what happens? Suddenly, it turns cold, it turns dark, and that type of happiness that we had with the sunlight, I know that here sometimes you get too happy. Too much sunlight, and you're not happy when it's so sunny. But let's say in a typical average climate, the happiness that we get from the sun being out, it kind of goes away. So in Arabic, this feeling of grief, it's given a very descriptive term. It's like the clouds that come. Now, Nabi Yaqub alayhi salam is in the state of mourning and grief. But what he's talking about is something which is called rawh. What's rawh? Rawh actually is related to the term rih. Rih in Arabic means wind. What happens when the wind comes and the clouds start to move across the sky? Right? Imagine you're watching this scene that happens, right? That the wind comes along and before it was cloudy, one of two things is going to happen. Either the wind is going to pick up and it's going to start blowing more and more, and then eventually it's going to rain. And then after the rain, what will happen is that the sun will come out again. And when the sun comes out again, then it's a different type of sun, right? The sunlight after a rain is different than the sunlight before the rain. Or sometimes what happens is the wind comes along and it blows the clouds away, and then the sun comes out again. Right? There's different things that happen in nature. And all of these are captured within these beautiful Arabic words here. We have gham and we have rih. So Ayatollah Jawadi Amuri, hafidhahullah, he has this beautiful point. He says that in the Quranic terminology, in the Quranic understanding of huzn and gham, of grief, there's one type of grief which is condemned, which is the type of grief where imagine somebody it's sunny and then suddenly it gets cloudy and then it just stays that way for them. Right? Imagine you're perpetually in a state where everything is cloudy around you. That type of grief is not something which is praised in the Quran. That's just gham and gham alone. You're always in that state of just being in the clouds, right? And that's the type of grief which we're supposed to actually dispel. We're supposed to get rid of it through the remembrance of Allah, through dua and whatnot. But there's another type of grief which is like this. When the clouds come, and after the clouds come, then it's not necessarily going to stay that way all the time. Either the wind will come along and it will blow the clouds away, or the wind will come along, there'll be a storm, and then the storm is going to lead to a new type of sunshine. That's a type of grief which is being praised in the Quran. So you see in the case of Nabi Yaqub alayhi salam that he was grieved. And the grief turned to tears. And the tears eventually turn into what? Into this movement to tahassasu. He tells his sons that with all your energy and your might, you have a mission which is to go and find Yusuf alayhi salam. And eventually they find Nabi Yusuf alayhi salam and everyone is reunited. There's a very powerful lesson in that for us about the purpose of grief and why is it that we grieve. I'm going to give you another example here about what is it and why is it that we are meant to shed tears, and what is the motivation behind crying and grieving. If you can recite a salawat, please. So we have an ayah from the Quran where Allah describes when our Prophet when he spread his message to different communities, we know that one of the communities he spread to were the Ahlul Kitab. And the Quran describes this, I don't have the ayah in front of me right now, but it describes them as when the ayat of the Quran were recited to these people, their eyes became filled with tears, mimma arafu min al-haq, out of what they understood from truth. So in this ayah of the Quran, we see that there are people who are crying and Allah is praising them. Why is it that Allah is praising them in this case? Why is it that this grief is a type of praiseworthy grief? Because these people were initially grieved. Why were they grieved? Because they understood now that their whole lives, they didn't have access to the teachings of the Quran. They were living in a state of delusion. They thought that they had access to all the truth and the best message and the best way of living and the best guidance, but now they realized that they were in error. They were misguided. For example, they used to believe in the Trinity. And now they realize their error, so they're grieving over what they had lost in their lives. But that type of grief is turning to what? It's turning into tears. The rain is falling. The clouds came, the rain is falling, and when these clouds part, because now the rain has fallen, now the sun is going to come out in a brighter way. Because of their tears, because of that type of grief, they are going to come out as winners. They'll be victorious. Even if they're mourning, Allah is going to compensate for them. So when we put this together, let's look at it on a practical level. Okay, we have two types of mourning. Right? There's a mourning which is, and a grieving which is praiseworthy, and another one which is not praised in the Quran. How do we apply that practically when it comes to our mourning and our rituals? I want to give a few practical tips here. Number one is that when it comes to the type of mourning which is not praised, okay, it's a type of mourning which is not connected to Allah. If it's not connected to Allah, it means that what? It's connected to oneself. Right? There's a type of mourning where it's not really divinely, motivated. It's something which is motivated for selfish reasons. What's an example of that? Okay, let's say that we're listening to, we come to like a majlis, or we come for like mourning, right? So we say that, okay, what is it that I'm coming for, right? Am I coming for the food, right? Am I coming for, let's say, the oratory power of the speaker, right? Am I coming for, let's say, the quality of the voice of the reciters? Now, all of these things can help. All of these things are beneficial. But that's not the only reason why I should be mourning, because if that's the reason for mourning, that's something which is very selfish. We have a culture now, alhamdulillah, there's a strong culture developing online of reciters, let's say, recording different latmiyas and nohas and putting them up. And sometimes, when we look at that culture, although there's a lot of things which are praiseworthy, sometimes we see that there can be a lot of similarity to, let's say, the music video culture. And the consumers of this culture can treat these videos and these these recitations similar to how they might treat music videos. That, this reciter, I really like him. Why do I like him? Because, he has a great voice, right? His beats, his tunes are really, really nice, right? I get really I'm into that. I like humming them afterwards. So what happened here? Your azadari, your mourning, it became something which is self-centered, right? Where's Allah? Inna Allah ma'ana, right? That type of grief isn't something which is being praised in the Quran, where it's something which is according to your personal tastes, and that's it. Now, another example, right? When we talk about grief that doesn't have Allah in it, right? Sometimes we have cultures of let's say, nights of mourning, right? We'll gather together, we'll mourn, and then we'll beat our chests remembering what happened in Karbala. Alhamdulillah, that's amazing, right? For some people to be dedicated to do that type of thing. But let's say that type of mourning, it led me into the early hours of the morning, like 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. Now I come home and I was like, man, I had a great azah session, right? It was great. I did this much sinazani, I did this much latmiya, I did this matam, right? And then I go to sleep at 3 o'clock, and most people, when they go to sleep at 3 o'clock in the morning, they're not going to wake up for their Fajr prayers. So what happened here is that morning that they had, it became a morning which was self-centered, because Allah left the picture there, right? It's not something, because if it was meant for Allah, if it was for the sake of Allah, the very least is that they would say, well, the people I'm mourning, what do they want from me, right? Imam Hussein alayhi salam, one of the things that the enemy hated was his dedication to salah, right? So if I want to do tawalli of Imam Hussein, I want to bari of his enemies, one of the ways I do that is through my salah. Right? Every time we do our salah, we are showing that we are aligned with Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and we are against his enemies. Right? Every time we do our salah, it's a pledge of allegiance to the Imam of our time. One of my teachers recently, I had a beautiful opportunity to visit Qom and to visit some of my teachers. And in this past trip some months back, one of my really nice teachers, one of my great teachers, for whatever reason, we never had a chance to pray behind him. Right? We had learned from him in class, we had seen him after class, we had talked to him, question and answer sessions, but we never had a chance to actually pray behind him. But myself and one of my friends and colleagues, when we went to visit, this time we got a chance to pray behind him. And one of the beautiful memories I have is that right when he stood for prayer, right, for a moment, he did a tawassul to the Imam of our time. And he said that, Ya sahib zaman adrikni. Oh, master of the age, come to my aid right now. And I realized that for him, his prayer was a way of telling Imam Zaman that I'm with you, right? I'm in your camp. I'm aligning with you through my prayer. And this is very appropriate. This is the type of, if you want to talk about grief, it has to be grief that is aligned with prayer. Let's say that I'm planning my schedule and I say that, I'm coming for a majlis of mourning for Imam Hussein alayhi salam. So I know that the majlis starts at, let's say, 9:15, but prayers is at 8:45. Typically in our cultures, right? I'm just saying in general, in our cultures, what do? We say that, the real program starts at 9:15. Right? That's when before it's the Quran and then it's the prayers, right? The real program starts at 9:15. So we get there 9:23, if we get there, we'll get there right in time. Wait a minute. The real program meaning what? If we're really mourning and it's for the sake of Allah, then we're not looking for what I want. I'm looking for what Allah wants, which is conveyed to me through the Ahlul Bayt alayhim assalam. And what they want from me is that focus on Quran and the prayer. And of course, like these majalis are also wonderful as well. So it makes a difference in the type of mourning that I have. Now, the last point I want to make about this, and I feel like I've maybe gone on for some time. My apologies for speaking at length here. Inshallah, I'm wrapping up right now. You've been very patient. The last point that I want to make on this, brothers and sisters, is that importance of making sure and ensuring that the clouds turn into rain clouds. And the rain clouds eventually are going to part and a brighter sunshine is going to come out. What does that mean? Right? We saw it in the example of Nabi Yaqub alayhi salam. Nabi Yaqub, right, he's in the state of grief, he's in the state of mourning. Decades have passed while he's in the state of mourning. But he's not just staying in that state of mourning and just remaining there. Nabi Yaqub alayhi salam has a plan. Right? As soon as he receives divine permission to do so, he tells his sons, "Fatahassasu." You go out there. Fatahassasu is different than fatajassasu in the Quran. These words really mean a lot. Tahassasu means go out and with all your senses, with everything you got, go and search for Nabi Yusuf alayhi salam. You have a mission, right? And don't despair of the ruh of Allah. Don't think that wind is not going to come. Right? This is very important, that our grief should be transformational. Let's say that my whole life, the extent of my grief is that I come and I give my tears to Imam Hussein alayhi salam and to the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. Inshallah, that will be a source of pride for me on the Day of Judgment. It will be something beneficial. But the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam wanted something to happen. They wanted that grief to turn into something which is powerful, right? Something which is transformational. So as I'm, participating in these majalis of Azza, I need to be asking myself that where is it that my tears were rain clouds and that grief turns into something powerful? I'm more motivated, right? How can I turn that into something which really takes me to the next level? Because that is what it's supposed to be. When we talk about mourning, let's say I'm listening to the events that happen in Karbala, for example, right? I can be thinking to myself that I'm crying, yes, because what I'm hearing is sad. I'm crying yes, because it's tragic. But I'm also crying because I'm in a state of mourning because those people demonstrate values that I myself am lacking. I see the gap And I'm crying for them, but I'm crying for myself because of what they had and what I don't have. And what the Imam of my time has and I don't have. And what the Imam of my time wants me to have and I don't have. That's the type of crying that I'm doing. Imagine how transformational that type of grief is. So when it comes to Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, and we refer to him as, we use these different titles. For example, we say he's the buka. Let's not reduce it to merely crying for the sake of crying and emotional crying. Imam Sajjad alayhi salam crying was something that was moving a whole nation to eventually uprise against the despot of the time. And it was tears that have found a way centuries later into our daily rituals and our daily practice and our daily supplications. If we are here mourning Imam Sajjad alayhi salam and we don't have a daily connection with his munajat, with his 15 whispered prayers or his daily du'as or his sahifa, then we have to really ask ourselves that what are we mourning for? Because we didn't capture the true essence of what Imam Sajjad's mourning was all about. Please say salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. May Allah reward you for your patience. Inshallah, I will be wrapping up right now. But now this is the special part where we actually get to remember the tragedy of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam's martyrdom. My request to all my respected brothers and sisters is let's adopt the etiquette of mourning and try to bring tears to our eyes. And inshallah, in that way, these tears will be that rain which falls that leads to, inshallah, a better situation within ourselves. صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله صلى الله عليك يا ابن رسول الله صلى الله عليك أيها المقتول عطشانا بكربلاء صلى الله عليك يا سفينة النجاة ويا مصباح الهدى. Peace and blessings be upon you, O our Master, our beloved Imam Hussein. Peace and blessings be upon you, O son of Fatima and son of Ali al-Murtada. Peace and blessings be upon you, O grandson of Rasulullah, O the one who was killed on the sands of Karbala while his mouth was thirsty and he lay by the banks of the Euphrates River. Peace and blessings be upon you and your noble companions, and upon those prisoners. Ya laytana kunna ma'akum fanafuza fawzan azima. If only we could have been with you and attain that great victory that you attained. This is the night of the martyrdom of Sayyidus Sajidin, Zainul Abidin. A night where we remember the one who dedicated his life towards the worship of Allah, who would always be seen in the state of sujood, who would always be seen making dua, who would always be seen weeping for what befell his father and the shuhada in Karbala. On this very night, we're told that Imam Sajjad alayhi salam asks his beloved son, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, Ya bunayya, oh my dear son, bring me some water. I wish to do some wudu. I wish to talk to Allah. When Imam Baqir alayhi salam brings water to his father tells him, oh my son, this is the evening, this is the night where the promise of Allah will come to me. I will be leaving this world. He gives him some advice, but what does this tender Imam, this tender-hearted Imam tell his son? He tells him, Imam Baqir, there is a camel that I have. This camel has served me so well many times. It has been my mount as I have performed the Hajj and I have traveled to Makkah. Oh my son, after I leave this world, take care of this camel. Treat it well. Do not subject to torture. Do not treat it in an ill-mannered way. Perhaps Imam Sajjad alayhi salam is remembering at that time what he had told them. He had told them that when it comes to the animals, we are told to give them some water. We are told to treat them well. But when it came to my father and my family members, they didn't even give them the courtesy they give animals. They didn't even give them water before they killed them. One of the servants of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, he saw how the Imam, year after year, he did not relent on his grief. When he would bring him his food, and drink, the Imam's eyes would be filled with tears until the tears would drip into the food and the water. He told the Imam, I am fearful for you. If you do not eat and drink and you cry this much, it is going to affect your health. He tells him that don't you know that Yaqub knew that his son Yusuf was alive. Yaqub had 12 sons, but despite knowing that he was alive, he cried so much that he lost his eyesight. When it comes to me, I saw with my own eyes, I witnessed what they did to my father and my family members. In front of my own eyes, they slaughtered them. And then he would say, قُتِلَ أَبِي جَائِعًا قُتِلَ أَبِي عَطْشَانًا. My father was killed while his stomach was empty. My father was killed while his mouth was thirsty. Let us remember the event that took place on the day of Ashura. Imam Hussein alayhi salam looks to the left, he looks to the right. He sees that there is no one standing there. He cries out, هَلْ مِن مُغِيثٍ يُغِيثُنَا. Is there anyone to come to the help of the Ahlul Bayt? هل من ذاب يذب عن حرم رسول الله. Is there anyone to come and protect the haram, the special family of the Prophet of Allah? When Imam Sajjad alayhi salam realizes that there's no Abbas to respond, there is no Qasim, there are none of the companions, Imam Sajjad alayhi salam drags himself up, he leans on a cane, he takes his sword, he comes out of the tent. When Imam Hussein alayhi salam sees him, he tells Zainab, he says, Ihbisihi, don't let him go. This earth cannot be left without a hujjah of Allah on the earth.
Imagine Imam Sajjad alayhi salam hearing the cry of his father, hearing the cry of his aunt, that is there no Muslim among you who will come and aid my brother? And Imam Sajjad alayhi salam is not able to come to the aid of his father. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. We ask Allah Ta'ala to accept this majlis from us, to help us to understand and appreciate the teachings of the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, and to apply them to our lives. We ask Allah Ta'ala that these tears and this mourning be a source of inspiration for us to become better servants of His and to become better followers of the Imam of our time. And we ask Allah Ta'ala to hasten the reappearance of the Imam of our time with the barakah wa salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Y'all sing. Y'all sing. Y'all sing. Mola Sajjad, Mola Sajjad, the tears in your eyes are Ali's jihad. Mola Sajjad, Mola Sajjad, the tears in your eyes are Ali's jihad. Mola Sajjad, Mola Sajjad, the tears in your eyes are Ali's jihad. Mola Sajjad, Mola Sajjad, the tears in your eyes are Ali's jihad. When the azan comes on, he will ruin Sham. Each tear from his eye recites a verse of Quran. You are an ayah, you reflect the face of God. And tell the muazzin, Aliyun Wali Allah. There's a bruise from the hand that struck Ruqayya. Devils from Umayyah kept hitting the child. For a long time you went on, you couldn't smile. For a long time you went on, you couldn't smile. Mola Sajjad, Mola Sajjad, the tears in your eyes are Ali's jihad. Mola Sajjad, Mola Sajjad, the tears in your eyes are Ali's jihad. Mola Sajjad, Mola Sajjad, the tears in your eyes are Ali's jihad. Mola Sajjad, the tears in your eyes are Ali's jihad. We see you and we know Haydar hasn't left. Just like he's tied to the camel, there's a chain on your neck. And the flame from Butul's house has burned Zainab's tent. We've heard your lectures and we know you're heaven sent. You taught me how to pray, you taught me to repent. You're my salvation, I'm drowning in sins. You saw your father, but couldn't help him. You saw your father, but couldn't help him. Mola Sajjad, Mola Sajjad, the tears in your eyes are Ali's jihad. Mola Sajjad, Mola Sajjad, the tears in your eyes are Ali's jihad. Mola Sajjad, Mola Sajjad, the tears in your eyes are Ali's jihad. Mola Sajjad, Mola Sajjad, The tears in your eyes are Ali's. You entered the palace, they had thought you disgraced, but your auntie and your lectures have upturned that place. Every word was inqilab, you felt your jihad. Your strikes on their hearts have blackened their face. You called out, Ya Rab, my father was robbed. Blessings in your dua upturned their whole state. Blessings in your dua upturn their whole state. Mola Sajjad, Mola Sajjad. The tears in your eyes are Ali's jihad. Mola Sajjad, Mola Sajjad. The tears in your eyes are Ali's jihad. Mola Sajjad, Mola Sajjad. The tears in your eyes are Ali's jihad. Mola Sajjad, Mola Sajjad, the tears in your eyes. When you walk through Medina, you resemble the Nabi. You give charity and teach, they remember Ali. But every time you drink, you begin to weep. People don't even know Hussein was killed while thirsty. You're the flag of Islam that the enemy is hitting. The children crying, the women screaming. How long will you cry for the soldiers you've lost? You fight for your Lord and their blood was the cost. You fight for your Lord and their blood was the cost. Mola Sajjad, Mola Sajjad. The tears in your eyes are Ali's jihad. Mola Sajjad, Mola Sajjad. The tears in your eyes are Ali's jihad. Mola Sajjad, Mola Sajjad. The tears in your eyes are Ali's jihad. Mola Sajjad, Mola Sajjad. The tears in your eyes are Ali's jihad. Ya Hussein.
Ya Hussein, 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 Ya Hussein.
तू शहनशाहे दर्द है, तू शहनशाहे दर्द है, बतला रही है शाम, रोने के लिए काफ़ी है सज्जाद तेरा नाम, रोने के लिए काफ़ी है सज्जाद तेरा नाम, रोने के लिए काफ़ी है सज्जाद तेरा नाम, रोने के लिए काफ़ी है सज्जाद तेरा नाम। तू शहनशाहे दर्द है, तू शहनशाहे दर्द है, बतला रही है शाम, रोने के लिए काफ़ी है सज्जाद तेरा नाम, रोने के लिए काफ़ी है सज्जाद तेरा नाम, रोने के लिए काफ़ी है सज्जाद तेरा नाम, रोने के लिए काफ़ी है सज्जाद तेरा नाम। चला बेकसों का कारवां, बीमार लोगों सारवां है, संग सरे उरिया शहला फता की बेटियां, करबो बला के दश्त में, करबो बला के दश्त में बरपा हुआ कोहराम, रोने के लिए काफ़ी है सज्जाद तेरा नाम, 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 रोने के लिए کافی ہے سجاد تیرا نام رونے کے لیے کافی ہے سجاد تیرا نام تو شہنشاہ درد ہے تو شہنشاہ درد ہے بتلا رہی ہے شام رونے کے لیے کافی ہے سجاد تیرا نام رونے کے لیے کافی ہے سجاد تیرا نام مستوروں میں ایک مرد ہے غیرت سے چہرہ زرد ہے کربل کی جمی گرد ہے زینب کے یہ دل میں درد ہے روتا ہے سر جھکا کے روتا ہے سر جھکا کے کرتا نہیں کلام رونے کے لیے کافی ہے سجاد تیرا نام 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 تو شہنشاہ درد ہے تو شہنشاہ درد ہے بتلا رہی ہے شام رونے کے لیے کافی ہے سجاد تیرا نام رونے کے لیے کافی ہے سجاد تیرا نام مشکل تھی بڑی وہ گھڑی دربار میں زینب کھڑی شبیر کے لب پہ چڑھی سجاد نے پہنی گھڑی دربار یزیدی کے دربار یزیدی کے لرزے تھے در و بام رونے کے لیے کافی ہے سجاد تیرا نام رونے کے لیے کافی ہے سجاد تیرا نام رونے کے لیے کافی ہے سجاد تیرا نام تو شہنشاہ درد ہے تو شہنشاہ درد ہے بتلا رہی ہے شام رونے کے لیے کافی ہے سجاد تیرا نام 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 یا حسین 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 اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد السلام عليك يا رسول الله يا محمد بن عبد الله السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين يا علي بن أبي طالب السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين السلام عليك يا خديجة الكبرى أم المؤمنين السلام عليك يا حسن بن علي المجتبى السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله يا حسين بن علي الشهيد بكربلاء السلام عليك يا علي بن حسين زين العابدين السلام عليك يا محمد بن علي الباقر السلام عليك يا جعفر بن محمد الصادق السلام عليك يا موسى بن جعفر الكاظم السلام عليك يا علي بن موسى الرضا السلام عليك يا محمد بن علي الجواد السلام عليك يا علي بن محمد الحادي السلام عليك يا حسن بن علي الأسكري السلام عليك يا حجة الله يا صاحب الزمان السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن، السلام عليك يا كابة الإيمان، السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان. عجل على ظهورك، عجل على ظهورك يا ابن الحسن، يا ابن الحسن، عجل على ظهورك، عجل على ظهورك. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Brothers and sisters, just a reminder that the tabarruk distribution will take place